Councilor Simpson.
Good morning, President.
Good morning. Councilor Gonzalez.
Morning, Present.
Councilor Nolan.
Good morning. Present.
Good morning. Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councilor Lewis.
Present.
President Peterson is excused today, and Deputy Council President Wong.
Present. Okay, and before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
I'm Jason, and I'm an event production manager. Here at the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Portland 5.
Okay, great. First item on our agenda is the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. We'll get an update on that. Metro has received a Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant from the EPA to do the planning necessary to create regional climate action plans for the Portland, Vancouver metro area. Later in 2024, the EPA will make implementation grants available to fund emissions reductions projects identified in these plans. Metro staff have been working closely with regional partners to develop these plans and are here today to share their progress on the first plan, the Priority Climate Action Plan with Council. Today we have Catherine Ciarlo, our Metro Planning and Development and Research Director, as well as Elliot Rose, Senior Transportation Planner.
Thank you so much, councilors, for having us here today. I'm Catherine Ciarlo, Planning and Development and Research Director. I use she, her pronouns, and we're really pleased to be able to talk to you today about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant that Councilor Wong mentioned. We received that last fall. We're here to update you on the sprint of work that's happened to date, and also outline what is to come and get your input as we work to develop future funding opportunities. And I'm going to turn it over now to Elliot Rose, who's done the bulk of the coordination work and the receiving work on the grant and has really, like I say, been in full sprint on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Director Ciarlo. For the record, Elliot Rose, Senior Transportation Planner in Planning Development Research, and also the project manager of this EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And let's just dive right in. This is some excellent introductions framing this up. Next slide. So we're here to talk with Council about this grant today. Because it's an important grant that over the near term makes our agency partners eligible to pursue implementation grants for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And over the long term, it funds the creation of a comprehensive regional climate action plan, which is a great opportunity because we don't have one of those for our region currently. So in the near term, Council can support Metro and its agency partners in applying for these implementation grants. And over the long term, your feedback will help us ensure that this comprehensive plan that is in the next phase addresses the key needs and opportunities we have when it comes to reducing emissions. Next slide. So these are non-competitive four-year planning grants that really focus on identifying the most effective and implementation-ready greenhouse gas reduction strategies. There are two things that are a little unusual about these grants that I want to draw your attention to right off the bat. The first is the geography, which extends beyond the metro region to cover 7 counties in the entire metropolitan statistical area that includes Southwest Washington, as well as Yamhill and Columbia counties. The second is that not only is this grant broader in geography, but it's broader in scope. We're normally here talking with you about land use and transportation projects. This grant extends beyond transportation and asks us to consider reducing emissions from buildings, the solid waste stream, energy generation, industrial processes, and agriculture. So it's been an interesting challenge right off the bat because none of the existing tables we convene align perfectly with these grants. So next slide. We stood up a group. The first thing we did was stand up a group called the Climate Partners Forum that consists of all the public agencies that we need at the table to help steer this project. And I'm sharing it here so you can see everyone that's been involved, and if there's an agency that is working on this process that you'd like to connect with, I'm happy to connect you with their staff. If there's an agency that you think should be involved in this process and isn't on this list, please let me know and I'll reach out to them about participating. This is an open forum where people can come and go because this is a new to us grant process with some urgent deadlines, and we want to maintain a lot of flexibility for people to show up when an issue or a community that's important to them is an area of focus for the grant. Next slide. So the CPRG process consists of 2 rounds of planning, each of which is followed by a round of implementation funding. So we're over in the Priority Climate Action Plan. That's the leftmost red arrow on this slide. This is a very quick turnaround plan. We've had 6 months to create it. And it's really focused on which actions on our existing plans are best suited to pursue some implementation grants that EPA is planning to make available 1 month after the plan is due. Those are the CPRG implementation grants that are shown in that green bubble to the right of the Priority Climate Action Plan arrow. Then, after those implementation grants get awarded, we circle back to the planning and have another pass at creating a comprehensive climate action plan that isn't so targeted on one particular implementation funding opportunity, considers a broader set of actions and a broader set of opportunities to implement those actions. We have 1.5 years to create that, and EPA has indicated that there will be other that's the dark blue arrow in the middle of the process there. And then EPA has indicated that they're working to condition or prioritize other implementation funds toward the projects that are included in the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. The details of that are still a little fuzzy, and that's that fuzzy green bubble that's next to the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan arrow. Lastly, we have 2 years on the back end of the grant just to update EPA on the status of the actions captured in these plans because they really want to know how they're moving forward. Next slide. So, another interesting thing about this grant is that we are not the only agency doing this planning work in a way that affects the metro region. So this is showing all the CPRG planning grantees across the country. Any state in yellow has a state-level CPRG planning grant. Any region that's highlighted with a red dot has a metro area grant. And you can see that in our region, Oregon and Washington both have state-level plans. So what this means is that Metro and our agency partners can apply to implement not only actions that's in the metro area plan that Metro's leading, but also the actions in the relevant state climate action plan, whether that's Oregon and Washington, depending on which side of the Columbia that they're located on. So we're doing a lot of coordination behind the scenes with Oregon and Washington State to make sure that these plans aren't duplicative, they're mutually supportive. That way we tee up as many agencies as possible across the Pacific Northwest to successfully pursue these implementation grants and bring home funding for climate to the region. Next slide. Okay, so I feel like I've just mentioned a pretty bewildering array of plans and processes. I'm gonna try to clarify just how they all relate real quickly before we move into to discussion. So before we got this grant, we started with a universe that looked like this. We had some local and regional climate action plans. We had some state-level climate action plans. Those overlapped in some ways and not in others. Next slide. These priority climate action plans that Metro's leading at the metro area level and DEQ or the Washington Department of Commerce are leading at the state level are focused on finding actions that are within that existing universe of plans that are really ready to move forward. Next slide. And one way that these actions can move forward is by applying for these implementation grants that are available for projects included in the priority climate action plans. Metro leads the plan, but either Metro or any of our agency partners can apply for an implementation grant. We expect to see implementation grants for some, but not all of the strategies included in the Priority Climate Action Plan. Next slide. And then finally, after these implementation grants are awarded, this is showing where that comprehensive climate action plan looks like in this process. The key thing to take away is that these comprehensive climate action plans can elevate stuff that was already in this priority climate action plan that we created and further detail and advance it, or they can cover new actions that wasn't in the initial plan. Next slide. So what we've learned so far as we do this, I mentioned this process is really about identifying implementation-ready projects that reduce high amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. And the implementation-ready side has been particularly interesting for Metro and our agency partners. We do a lot of long-term planning to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This grant is really saying, yeah, the planning is great, but what's going to start reducing emissions in the next 5 years? That's really a key frame we're looking at here. Though we have a lot of local climate planning in the region, those plans vary really widely. That's a barrier to taking the type of collective action that EPA wants to see and that we know we need in the region to reduce emissions. Though these grants are broad in focus, our most significant greenhouse gas reduction opportunities are in transportation, residential energy efficiency, and waste management. These are the sectors where Metro and our agency partners have done the most planning and analysis to really identify actions to benefit the climate in a lot of detail, and where we have a lot of regional coordination that can set the stage for successful implementation grant applications. And lastly, there isn't enough implementation funding either in these CPRG grants or in the other federal and state climate resources that we're aware of to support all these opportunities. So we're trying to be strategic about which ones are really best candidates for the CPRG implementation grants and other funding streams that we're seeing. Next slide. So though implementation grant applications are due April 1st, we already have a fair idea of which projects are moving forward from the region, both because we've been coordinating a lot with our agency partners and because EPA requested notices of intent to apply on February 1st. This slide's listing the projects that submitted notices of intent. Not going to walk through all of them in detail, happy to answer questions about any of these, but I just want to note right now that they're covering those 3 areas that I mentioned. We have 2 transportation-related applications, one that's related to reducing emissions in new affordable housing that's funded by Metro through our TOD program, and one that's about the waste stream. In addition, I didn't highlight this on the slide because because it didn't submit a notice of intent, but Washington County is really active in leading a coalition of cities to see if they can develop an application to provide energy efficiency retrofits to existing publicly managed affordable housing units. So that complements this Metro action that's focused on new units. We have applications covering both new and existing affordable housing units in the works. Next slide.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Deputy President. On the last slide for the TSP investment, is that system-wide or is that specific to the BRT projects?
It's a really good question. We're trying to figure out those details right now.
No, for
Yeah.
sure. Thanks.
Next slide.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Just real quick on that, go back one more slide. The composting capacity, is that going to serve just the city of Gresham or the other 3 cities as well, Troutdale, Fairview, Wood Village?
Something we've been trying to figure out. That one came in a little bit late in our process, and we didn't have the chance to vet it against the implementation grant criteria in the same way we did the other ideas. So we're coordinating with Gresham to try to figure out some of the details of how of what the application covers and how it moves forward right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I? Just to follow on that, are we coordinating with WPES about how that might fit in with the facilities plan?
Yes, WPES staff have been active in providing
great.
input and helping identify waste-related strategies.
And maybe I could just say that Elliot did coordinate with WPES as we thought through Metro's potential grants for this round, and we'll continue to coordinate with them as we move forward, looking at future rounds too.
Thanks.
So,
With regard to Gresham's application, what about cities that are not part of the collaborative? For instance, City of West Lynn was not on that list, Yet at their council meeting last Monday, they discussed 11 strategies for their climate reduction plan, one of which would be composting, and it was prohibitively expensive. So how would we engage West Lynn in this process? I just did it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is exactly the type of feedback that I was hoping to hear. I'll just wrap up the presentation really quickly. So, I mean, what's next? We're wrapping up this plan, this first plan furiously to get it done by March 1st. We have implementation applications due April 1st that are going through a lot of work right now. And then, once those are in, we have a year and a half, which seems really leisurely given the timeline we've been on, to develop this comprehensive climate action plan and step back and, get to some other ideas that we didn't get to in this first round when our laser focus on what's most ready to move forward. I'm listing a couple of the ideas that have just come up from partners in this slide. There's examples of that. Next slide. All right, I'm going to show this bubble diagram once more in case it helps cement how all these things fit together. We're highlighting the implementation grants and the comprehensive climate action plans in orange because that's the part where I talk with you most about, where we're most interested in council's feedback today.
It's a butterfly.
Thank you for seeing that. I was trying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see it. And just a quick question.
Yeah.
Since it feels very dialogue-y, which I really appreciate. I guess, would you say climate smart fits under local/regional climate plans, or, what do you think? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah,
We have a lot of climate plans, I feel, but unfunded mandates essentially.
I think Climate Smart is I see that as a regional plan that's limited to the transportation sector. Yeah, and the fact that we have Climate Smart and other plans like it helps us identify, not identify more sweeping transportation actions, but identify them in more detail because we've gone through so many rounds of planning.
Great answer, thanks.
So, sorry, should we just move into discussion? We just had next slide with our discussion questions.
Oh.
That's all.
That's great. Would you like me to, I'll frame up those questions for you. I'll thank Elliot for the incredible sprint which he's sort of distilled into these slides, and just frame up some questions for you all. These are our introductory questions. If you have other things you want to go back to and ask for more detail on the slides, we're happy to do that too. But the first is just what questions you have about the grant process and about Metro's leadership and the regional approach. You've framed up a couple of them, happy to hear more. And then the other question, Councilor Lewis, is very much the question you asked, which is, as we're looking forward to this next phase, this broader planning phase, which will set the stage for potential future implementation grants, are there efforts that we should be connecting with or stakeholders we should make sure to bring into the process as well? So those are the two questions that we've put out there, but we also really welcome your questions and input as we have this discussion.
Great. And I see we have questions from Councilor Rosenthal, then Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. First, a comment, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the mayors yesterday asked at the WCCC, asked a question about how these projects that are shown for this first phase look sort of like almost randomly chosen. And I think your answer was, these are the ones that were more or less shovel-ready in a sense, and that we have another round that's coming up. So we expect to see a lot more, such as West Lynn and things like that, show up. And I think that was your answer, that this is a very fast track for this first round of things. And they may not be the highest and best, but they are the ones that we can do immediately. But I had a couple questions. One is, I noticed that at Washington Department of Commerce, and this gets me into a regional situation. First of all, when it comes to solid waste or waste, Department of Ecology is usually more involved than Commerce, is my understanding. So I'm a little surprised to see that Commerce is there. And is there provision in this overall process for regional by-state coordination or collaboration, because, I mean, you know, we actually are, you know, sort of an ecological region, and we share a lot of climate, et cetera, and a lot of transportation issues and so forth. So, you know, power structures on the Columbia River, for example, things like that. Is there any potential in this for, you know, by-state coordination, or is it going to be limited to just sort of SMSAs?
There's definitely potential for bi-state coordination. I'm on calls with EPA and my state agency counterparts at least monthly on this grant where we discuss that. And EPA has opened the door to coalitions of multiple states applying for these implementation grants. So they're definitely considering that. You know, I think what you're describing, Councilor Rosenthal, is a really interesting piece for our region as we figure out how we fit into this, because we have states doing things that are aligned but slightly different on both sides of the Columbia. And that's another reason why, you know, maybe the short-term actions that we're highlighting look the way that they do, because they're not only the ones that are captured in current climate action plans and have a lot of thought, but also the ones that fit within the frameworks that both Oregon and Washington use for climate action planning.
Yeah, as you remember, the question I asked yesterday had to do with particularly, one of the things you pointed out was that potential for increased clean energy generation. And of course, obviously, it's a bi-state concern as to what extent we're going to modify the power grid, the Northwest power grid, to accommodate these things. And so that becomes a bi-state kind of thing, which could be a major item in the long run. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you. It'll be fun.
Great, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much, Elliot. I enjoy hearing the updates, since I think those are fresh slides since last I saw the presentation. I think it's really nice work to be at the point of refinement where you have some examples of what folks are applying for. I guess it makes sense to me that it's pretty heavily weighted on the transportation side and not the built environment side with buildings, because of the limitation that you are not going to fund program, because program would expire when the funds run out in 5 years. And I guess my question is, what opportunities do you think there are to see electrification and other home energy type programs come forward, since we know there's an equal weight of greenhouse gas reduction found there as in our transportation system?
Yeah. So I think the focus that we've landed on for these first round of implementation grants, you see that is focusing on the affordable housing stock. And there's a couple different reasons for that. The first is those are projects that also have significant equity benefits, which are important to our region and that EPA is asking for. And we know in particular that if we try to require housing, affordable housing, to be more energy efficient, less of it might get built. And that's not good for our other goals. But the other reason to focus on affordable housing is because it's the type of housing that we as public agencies have the most oversight over. And I think that's something that we realized as we were crafting this is there's not a lot of regional coordination on building energy use like there is on transportation. And we needed to lay the groundwork for some of that. And we felt like the best place to start with a test bed for that was these projects where public agencies already have such deep involvement with the affordable housing that they build that we can use, is a little feeling that we can use these implementation grants focused on affordable housing as like a test, where this is what happens when we really control a lot about the housing and we do active things to manage that housing stock. And we can learn about what's most effective in reducing energy efficiency in the cases where we have the most control and also the most imperative in terms of the policies we have to invest, see how that works, and then see what we can do more broadly for the many other housing units in the region that, you know, are still occupied by low-income folks but aren't deed restricted affordable housing.
Well, if we're applying for $30 million for transit, why are we only applying for $5 million for housing? Why don't we apply for 30 for housing?
That's a good question, actually. So the Washington County, part of the thing is that part of the issue is that the Washington County project I mentioned, but that didn't submit a notice of intent to apply. By the way, that won't affect their chances. The notices of intent were optional. You know, that, I'm not sure what price tag that's going to come in at, but I think that will be, you know, in the 10 to $20 million range. So that will get us closer to parity there.
Okay, good,
And
thanks.
Elliot, do you want to answer maybe that question for why Metro's amount is scaled the way it is, that 5 million?
Oh, yeah, because, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Because we had a real opportunity to do this, to achieve energy efficiency specifically in our TOD program. This is low-hanging fruit for us in a way because we had already embarked on a partnership with Energy Trust and put some funding toward achieving some energy improvements in that grant. And so it felt really easy to point to what we were already doing as leverage, even though EPA isn't requiring match for these grants. A common thread I'm seeing in the applications that look successful is they're all scaling up programs that are already underway. And so it felt like we had a really good opportunity to say, we're already putting resources toward energy efficiency through the TOD program. We have low-hanging fruit opportunity to scale that up.
Yeah, thank you. And then I think we would also point to that shovel readiness component and the fact that standing up a big program is likely to take more time, but this amount for the PCAP does not preclude a larger amount moving forward. This is sort of a proof of concept moment in many ways.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Gonzalez?
All right, thanks. A few things I want to cover. I think first is just the recognition and appreciation that, Elliot, we had your capability, your capacity, and we had the nimbleness to deploy you for this opportunity to pursue the grant and to work on it. So I'm just really, really thrilled by your work, and what you've rolled out feels like the right approach. And you know, I think from what we're seeing, I feel like having those shovel-ready capital projects is the best investment that we can make, especially recognizing the uncertainty of funding for the future. So let's try and pull down as much as we can. I do want to make just a reminder comment for the council. We have the CPRG grant is in parallel to Environmental Justice Task Force that's happening within Metro, a collection of staff and leadership from different departments carrying a budget note that Councilor Wong and I have worked on, continuing to elevate this kind of this Metro-wide vision and strategy for climate pollution reduction, et cetera. And so I think that I like where the agency is going, and I just want to kind of emphasize that we have all these kind of processes going, and I'm hoping that for that other update that we are able to share some information and work for the budget process. But specifically to this, I just want to celebrate the work. I don't have the questions right in front of me right now, but I like it.
Thank you for the kind words.
Great. I do have a couple questions. I might not have the answers for today, but just kind of big picture, like we're applying for funds from the EPA, but are there other federal agencies that would look at our regional climate plans, for example, and also have additional funding opportunities? Has that been contemplated, or is the EPA kind of just in its own silo, and the U.S. Forestry Department or the U.S. DOT is doing their own things? So I guess that's my first question, and then I was hoping maybe you could also explain a little bit more on the process for creating the regional climate plan. Is it similar to kind of the RTP, where local jurisdictions might have their own climate plans, and then we kind of just we'll get it all together, or is it more collaborative? And then also, I know some like city and county climate action plans are more ambitious than others. So how do we account for you know, some folks that are aiming for stars and others that may, you know, be at a different level of, you know, beginning.
Okay, those are great questions. As far as alignment with other funding, this grant requires us to consider that because EPA seems to know that these CPRG implementation grants are very valuable and that they're flexible and they don't require a match. So they're actually requiring applicants to complete a section that says eligibility for other funding where they demonstrate why their application needs money from this particular funding stream, given all the other federal funding streams out there. And so as we do the plan, we've been making sure that we highlight all those things in the plan, all the related funding streams. I've coordinated a lot with Betsy Emery and GAPD, who keeps a really great running tab of these opportunities to make sure that we're highlighting the specific places where these funds from EPA could really advance climate work in the region and where we don't expect to receive other federal resources. The process for creating the PCAP, it's really had 3 steps. We had our consultant team who's been great, read every climate action plan in the region and come up with a list of all the actions that were included in each climate action plan that they then kind of standardized in order to account for some of those issues you're discussing. Then we went back to this Climate Partners Forum and said, hey, do we have this group of actions right? Did we review the right plans? They gave us some more stuff to review to make sure that list was final. Then we came up with a set of screening criteria at our next meeting that align with the EPA implementation grant criteria. And we shared with partners how we plan to evaluate each one of those. We didn't put the results out there yet. And we got feedback on that to make sure we had a good set of criteria to apply to these. And then we shared the results where we shared how that screening shook out and collected additional data that might either change the screening results or more likely as it was become apparent which projects were rising to the top, help us detail those projects in the plan.
Is it like, is there a back and forth of approval, or does like Metro have kind of a final say of like what's in that plan? Like, is it kind of like a JPAC model or?
You know, we're trying to do, it's a challenge because we don't have a decision-making body that governs the MSA. We have been what we've been trying to do is work through consensus with our partners because at the end of the day, you know, we want a result that everyone in this Climate Partners Forum has felt good about. And it, you know, I don't think folks, and particularly where everybody sees the folks at the table see an opportunity for their agency to apply. Because these have been so closely, this is a weird process, and because you've been so closely focused on this specific round of implementation grants, I guess it hasn't felt to me as much like, you know, we need to have this plan capturing all the actions in the region. That's why we're really focused on the CCAP, the comprehensive plan, that's the next phase. That's what we're supposed to do, is really create the climate, you know, the guiding plan for the region there. Since this has been a real short fuse look at these particularly implementation grants, the conversation's kind of been about, well, are we reflecting these criteria well enough and in a way that the different folks who think they have projects to advance see how those projects are reflected in this plan and have an understanding of how those projects might move forward for applications.
I'd like to add just a comment and a question, if I may, Counselor.
Of course.
The comment is this has definitely, in this past 6 months, given the time frame and the pretty strict limitations of what we're being asked to create, it's been this combination of consensus and pragmatism and realities. One of the things on one of Elliot's slides was there's limited capacity in our partner jurisdictions, honestly, to be able to even develop these proposals. So in that sense, I think it's made the decision-making easier, if you will, to move toward this particular sprint outcome. But Elliot, my question is, maybe you could elaborate a little bit with respect to Councilor Wong's question on how you see that playing out in the longer-term CCAP process. It's obviously a different time frame and a different set of pragmatic realities.
Yeah, I think we have more, I mean, we just have more time in the CCAP to get approvals and build consensus around the plan. And, you know, we have especially the ability, you know, part of what we want to do with this grant is coordinate with RTC. That's the regional coordination agency on the Washington side of the Columbia. And I think, you know, we've tried to do our best to bring, you know, we're talking with RTC's board and getting input on these projects, just as we're talking with council and JPACT. And I think, you know, with more time in the PCAP, there might be more time to formalize that and open up more of a cross-regional dialogue with that. I think we need to.
In the CCAP.
In the CCAP, sorry. We definitely have more time for that. And, you know, be interested in any feedback on what that might look like.
I don't know if we have a fully defined process long-term, but I'd be interested to know, like, what are the points of influence to make the most, like, ambitious plan we can possible would be. You know, I think our role in this is how do we facilitate and encourage, you know, all our jurisdictions to be as ambitious as possible in reaching our shared goals. So if it's just consensus-based, that might, you know, not have that element of agitation involved.
Yeah.
But I don't really know what pressure points, so that's something that, as you think about the whole process, you know, I'd be interested in learning more about your thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Excellent work.
Any other questions? Great.
Actually, I have one question.
Oh, sure.
Do you have any specific, or do we have any general goals on the overall sectors? For example, what is the potential either loading or percentage of reduction we could get from solid waste or from transportation or from housing? Do we have any long-term sort of overarching ideas of goals of what we could achieve if we get a good regional plan?
I think that varies by the sector. For transportation and also also waste, where we have these really solid regional waste plans that have regional waste and transportation plans that have climate goals and policy integrated into them. It's easier to get there than with respect to the building sector.
Right.
Where, you know, we have an inventory for buildings now for the region that's updated with our consultants. That's the first step in getting there. But I think figuring out what that potential is in that sector is an area where the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan calls for us to do that. And we're going to be developing new information, in particular in the non-transportation and waste sectors where we haven't had that kind of thinking before.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
More
you,
to
Catherine.
come.
Thank you, all. Yep.
Appreciate your good questions.
All right, next on the agenda, we'll have the 2024 Urban Growth Management Decision, Draft Regional Population, Household, and Employment Forecast. So every 6 years, the Metro Council must determine whether the urban growth boundary has adequate land for expected housing and job growth. The last urban growth boundary decision was in 2018, and Council will make another decision before December 2024. To inform each decision, Council considers a new regional population, household, and employment forecast that provides critical information about anticipated growth over the next 20 years and serves as a basis for assessing demand for housing and industrial land. Metro staff are here today to describe their process for seeking expert review of the forecast from external economists and demographers. Okay. Today we have Malou Wilkinson, who's the Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Research. We have Aaron Key, no? Okay. We have Ted Reed, Principal Regional Planner, Josh Harwood, Fiscal and Tax Policy Director, and Dennis Yee, the Metro Economist. Take it away.
Thank you, counselors. We're happy to be here today. We didn't want to have more of us than you, so Aaron's sitting over there. So again, I'm Malou Wilkinson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director of the Planning, Development, and Research Department. And great, we have our presentation up. I just wanted to do a tiny bit of context setting before I turn it over to these experts. Next slide, please. And we agreed that we really want to start every time we talk about this urban growth management decision, reminding us why we are doing this, why we have an urban growth boundary. And so just a really quick reminder that we have it because it helps us to protect high-quality farmland, forests, and natural habitats by really focusing development where it makes the most sense and helping to reduce our climate footprint. Managing an urban growth boundary makes the most of the land that we have within that boundary where there's already infrastructure in urban areas. And really our greater Portland region that we live in is a very desirable place for people to move and to stay. And with this culture of regional collaboration that we've built, we have a really strong foundation to maintain intentional growth that helps our region be resilient. People come and stay here for the quality of life that we have, and we know that investing in compact, vibrant neighborhoods is an investment in the region's workforce and economy and helps support affordable housing and access to all of the services that we need. Next slide, please. This is our project timeline. Just a reminder that last month we were here talking with you about the many topics that we've been bringing to the Urban Growth Report Roundtable. In our focus last month was on the statewide and national population and employment trends. Today, we're talking about our regional forecast. And so that is a critical piece of our puzzle. On the next slide, I want to really focus on the fact that we're here today to give you a piece of information. It's really like a puzzle that's up on your slide. This piece of information is not meant to tell anyone what to do about the urban growth boundary. We're focusing on demand today. As we continue to bring all of the pieces of information to you, our picture will become more clear, and this is going to happen over the next several months until the Urban Growth Report is published in June of this year. And then we'll move into the next phase of decision-making. So as you remember, demand for land is one part of the Urban Growth Report, and this regional forecast is the key component of that. Yet to come is the capacity information about what land can accommodate the growth inside the urban growth boundary, where there's typically more access to services and infrastructure. And then we'll also focus on information about the readiness of our cities to expand their boundaries. Next slide, please. So here I just want to really focus on the fact that what you're hearing about today isn't a plan. What you're hearing about today is a regional forecast that's based on demographic and economic trends. It anticipates what's likely to occur in the future. It's a tool for planners and leaders like you all to use when deciding what future policies and plans make sense, because we want to be providing you good, solid information to make your decisions. We're also really lucky to have staff like Dennis Yee who have been doing this for a really long time. And Dennis has completed a number of regional forecasts for us, and he has had the opportunity to go back and look at how well his forecasting has been, and particularly on the population side, it's been really good. So I just want to commend Dennis for his years of work here at Metro. And you'll also hear about the fact that he took his work this year to a set of peers to get their review and critique. We really want to be sure that we're providing you with information that is very sound. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ted, but I'm going to say again, this forecast, don't think of it as a plan, think of it as a tool. And it's the information that we need to be able to move forward. So I'm going to turn over to Ted, our project manager.
Thank you, Malou. Again, I'm Ted Reed, Principal Regional Planner. So as Malou noted, the information that we're providing is intended to give the council information to support your decision-making. And we want to, actually, if we can move to the next slide, we want to acknowledge as we're doing that there's uncertainty when we look out in the next 20 years. That uncertainty can come from variable migration rates that occur to the region over the years, can happen because of macroeconomic conditions that are beyond our control, global events, We've experienced a lot of that in the last several years. And then lastly, just another example, innovations that really can change the structure of the economy. We want to be clear about that uncertainty as we present this information, and we try to deal with that uncertainty in a few different ways. The first of which is that the council makes a decision every 6 years. So every 6 years, you get a new forecast that incorporates our best understanding at the time. So this is not a one and done exercise. Secondly, we, as Malou noted, conduct a peer review of the forecast so that it's not just us talking to ourselves, it's us bringing in demographers and economists from Portland State University, from the state of Oregon, to help us look over the work that we're doing, make sure that what we're providing you seems reasonable. And third, to acknowledge uncertainty, we use what we call a range forecast. And so within this range, we have a high end, a low end. In the middle is our baseline forecast. That's what we believe to be most likely. And something that we talked about in our peer review is that this forecast this time around really is quite different from previous forecasts that we've done, where the low to high were all sort of variations on positive growth. In this forecast, we have some structural demographic changes that have happened that our peer review underlined for us that lead to lower birth rates. The effect of a lot of this is that our low end of our range now contemplates possible population losses for the region. So that's very different than the situation we've been in before. Dennis and Josh will cover more of those details in a moment. So we don't want to think about the forecast low end and high end as being pessimistic or optimistic. It's really just, as Malou noted, us trying to give you our best information that we can. So we're not trying to attach value statements to that information. Next slide, please. So a little bit more context. The information you're going to get today is for our 7-county metropolitan statistical area. So you'll see that shown on the map. It includes areas north of the Columbia River in Washington State. This is essentially the economic region that we start with for this forecasting. We start there, again, because it's our economic region. It's also the level of geography where we have the best available data from the federal government to start the forecast from a baseline assessment. You see in red on this map the metro urban growth boundary. The council is going to be charged with making a decision about how much of this growth we're taking responsibility for in the metro urban growth boundary. We refer to that as our urban growth boundary capture rate. So the council will have more information about that capture rate, historic trends in the urban growth report to help you get to that decision point. But just today, we're going to be talking about 7-county metropolitan statistical area. All done.
Oh, all done. All right. Sorry. I'm Josh Harwood again, Fiscal and Tax Policy Director here at Metro. I'm here hopefully to facilitate a little bit of discussion with Dennis and you all around putting pen to paper. We've talked to a bunch of advisors. We've talked to a bunch of folks around the state and around the region to give us their best advice. We've pulled them together. Dennis, while I agree fundamentally with everything in the forecast, I will defer to him on the actual details of the actual numbers, as I have not been in the modeling. But there's two things that I think we want to address today, most notably. First is demographics. The second is employment. They're linked, obviously. They're very closely linked together. But first, we want to talk a little bit about demographics, because I think that's been where the biggest shift has been since the last time this has been visited. And I want to stress one thing, is that these trends were already happening before the pandemic. So this is not necessarily a pandemic story. Pandemic accelerated certain aspects of it, for sure. It absolutely did that. But we were already seeing the effects of a higher cost of living here towards slower growth and population and those types of things. So we'll start first with demographics. We can go to the next slide, the next couple of slides, actually. And I will turn it over to Dennis to talk about two things related to migration. First is the natural rate, and that's births and deaths. Pretty simple concept, and how that's changed over time. And then we'll talk a little bit about migration. And that migration will be most of the story, I think, when you get to talking about the decisions you'll make over the next year or so around the urban growth boundary. Migration's very volatile. It changes dramatically from one year to the next. But over the long run, we do have a trend that we're kind of pegging towards. And the state has come out with the types of analysis like what happens if we have a zero migration situation? What does that look like? So we're contemplating all of those scenarios as well. But I will turn it over to Dennis to talk about the specific numbers right now.
Thank you, Josh. For the record, my name is Dennis Yee. I'm the Metro economist. And just as a way of history, I've been doing the UGB, UGR stuff since 1994. So I think I have a pretty good track record, know the region pretty well, and I've applied a number of statistical models to attempt to glean how the future might unfold, and I'm hoping to share that information and my confidence in this forecast with you. So some of these details then attempt to speak to that degree of veracity. You know, it is a forecast after all, let me just say. So yeah, there's a range and there's a degree of uncertainty. But where we're probably less uncertain is on the demographic half of this forecast. And as Malou mentioned, many of my past population forecasts have been pretty much on target, well within a few percentage points. And as you go further out, of course, the cone of error increases. But coming out of the chute, since we do this every 6 years, I would say the forecasts are very tight, pretty accurate. So let me. By way of getting into some of the details, as Josh mentioned, there are two components of forecasting population. That's natural change, and the first part of natural change is births. And as you see from the left chart on the screen, I've shown several decades of birth rates for women of various age cohorts. And we see that births have been declining. The birth rate has been declining decade by decade. And when we translate that birth rate for women into, say, how many kids they might have in their lifetime, that's the second chart. And in the pre-Great Recession time, women were having roughly about 2 kids in their lifetime. That's an average. You know, there's some women who won't have kids, some women who have more. But in terms of family formation, about 2 kids. That's been the average, and that's pretty close to replacement rate, meaning we've had enough kids to kind of keep the population steady if we didn't account for migration. And as Josh mentioned, it accelerated. These trends have actually been in existence, the downward sloping trend in migration, and in fertility rates since after the Great Recession. So it wasn't the pandemic that caused this downshift, but it did speed things up. And then in the forecast, we have it bouncing back up again, but not nearly to the level of close to replacement. And this is very similar to what the state economists would say to you. The Portland State University, who's tasked with the official population forecast for the state and for counties and UGBs, we do that for our metro region. That's what I do. So we're anticipating a bounce back. It's not quite all the way to the 2.0, more like 1.5, and it's very much in line with any other population forecast bureau, whether you're talking about the Census Bureau or, as I said, some of the state agencies. So we're pretty much in line. So birth rates are lower, and so next slide, please. We'll switch to deaths. The chart on your left shows the number of deaths in the MSA, and it's just adding up everyone who historically we've seen that trend rising, and we've seen it spike up because of the pandemic, but it's now drifted lower back to what it was, and we have that upward shift in deaths because of the baby boom generation. We see them aging out and adding to the death rates, the number of deaths. Meanwhile, on the right chart, I will say you probably have heard life expectancies are increasing. And that's what the curves show, the downward shift historically, and that's expected to continue. So life expectancies are rising or getting better, but conversely, deaths are rising because of the structure of our population base, baby boomers being a bulge in that population pyramid that I'm sure many of you have heard of. And so they're gonna age out and add to the death rate. So when we add these two together in the next slide, please, the difference between births minus deaths is then what we call, demographers call natural change, and we've seen it drift significantly lower since the Great Recession. And that's sort of timing with the aging out of baby boomers, at least the beginning of it. And we see that trend, the front end of that trend begin and then continue to slide and exacerbated because of the pandemic, obviously. But then we anticipate it bouncing back up a little bit, hence the little spike afterwards, but not nearly back to where it was, and we're really kind of extending that trend of death rates that we've seen continue since the Great Recession. And so that by the next decade, somewhere in the early part of the 2030s, we see that the difference between births minus deaths, we see more deaths. And we see natural change, that is the addition to population from this demographic phenomenon, begin to subtract from the base population. Now that's without considering migration, mind you. So if we left everything the same, we closed the borders of our MSA, didn't allow people to leave or come in, this would be the case. We'd start losing population numbers. But that's not the case. We have open borders. On the next slide, we talk about net migration. So this is the second major component of forecasting the demographic trends in this region. And unlike births and deaths, which are more consistent, that you probably saw that there were some fluctuations, but they're steadier, they're more predictable. Migration, not so much. And that's because migration factors tend to flow up and down with changes in the economy, employment, inflation, income, all those interest rates, all those kinds of things that we've had to worry about, or if you're a stock market investor or a business owner, you've had to worry about those short-term phenomena, and so do essentially people who make the decision to move or not move. They worry about those things too. And housing affordability is one of the biggest things that cause these fluctuations, as well as the economy. The economy, that is the number of jobs that a region doesn't produce or able to generate. So we see those fluctuations historically in migration, where during recessions, those gray bar areas represent the recession times periods, migration falling. And then you see it repeating over and over as a business cycle. It's not quite in line because there is a lag in people's decision-making whether to move or not, because it does take time to sell your house or to find a job, but nevertheless, it comes in line with that. For the forecast period, we're not so sure, and we're not forecasting, as my colleagues have said, it's a trend forecast. We're not trying to forecast because we don't really have the ability to forecast the next business cycle. If I did, you wouldn't be seeing me. I'd be on Wall Street making billions of dollars. But having said that, we do our best, and we play out the current business cycle. Hence, you see that little hitch in the front end of that forecast period. So that is to the right to the dotted vertical line, and then we're playing out that business cycle. And what we've seen historically is that migration, net migration into this region, because it's been positive generally, is about 15,000 migrants per year. So yeah, it fluctuates, but I'm just averaging it out. So for the forecast, because we're not forecasting business cycles, and it's really hard, we tend to say on average, on balance, we're gonna get about 15,000. We let the model play itself out and let some of the business cycle effects happen. And the CHIPS Act has some influence because it's part of the economic story that we added to the regional forecast. And so we anticipate positive net migration going forward. But in reality, going forward, some years are gonna be higher, some years are gonna be lower in that net migration forecast.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Dennis, I'll just jump in real quick.
Thank
One
you.
of the things that's happened over the course of getting together with experts from various places is some issues have come up repeatedly. We talked about this before with you around climate refugees. And this is the pen to paper exercise that I was talking about, right? When we get to pen to paper, while intuitively we can think about climate refugees and people migrating because of resource constraints and those kinds of things, the reality of how it's played out thus far is such that the opposite's happened. People are moving to where there are fewer resources. So in the long run, I think we understand that there's a possibility to see some of that happen. We have not seen it in the numbers, and we are not inclined to add it explicitly into a forecast because of that. And so I think right now, at least at this point, I think it's reasonable to assume that the impacts of climate and those types of things in the environment are relatively small as compared to things like cost of living and affordability. People just aren't thinking in those terms, in terms of where they live and whatnot. We can see it in people's choices and their actual actions. And so I think that that's one of the issues that we've talked up. If we go to the next slide real quick too. Another thing that just highlight, this is not gonna be a surprise for anybody, but we do have increasing diversity in the forecast. This is similar to the state, the nation, something that's well-known demographically. Next slide, please. And then this is the regional demographic outlook. As Ted mentioned, the low end of it does contemplate flat or negative growth. The high end is more aggressive, and the middle is kind of a little slower than what we've had experienced historically, but still growth. So I think it's worth pausing right there to talk about demographics if people have any questions, and if not, we can move on to the economy or the jobs, I should say, the employment forecast.
Colleagues, any questions? Councilor Simpson?
Yep, thank you, Deputy President Wong. Real quick, Josh or Dennis, when you accounted for climate refugees, something that came to mind for me, especially after Roe v. Wade was overturned, was folks coming to the area or to the state seeking political asylum.
Counselor Simpson, sorry, could you speak more directly into the mic?
Political asylum and or health, abortion rights, health access. So like, does that account for that as well?
What I will say about this, and Dennis, jump in, because you'll know more about the details. I will tell you that while those stories are real and they are absolutely impactful for those individuals, on the gross numbers of migration numbers, they're relatively small. It doesn't mean they won't grow over time, but they are relatively small in terms of the big modeling. We're talking about a couple million people in the region. So it's a relatively small impact. And it wouldn't be explicitly included in a forecast like this because we're really looking at long-term trends and slow movements.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we can move on to the next slide. And
Sorry, one second.
Just a quick question. Looking at this slide of the projections, how sensitive are these, say, the levels of these to the assumptions that were made regarding the reproduction rate, the 1.5? In other words, if it goes up to 1.6 or drops down to 1.4, how sensitive are these projections to that kind of change?
Yeah, if we increase that fertility rate from, as you said, 1.5 to say 1.6, or even falls, it could go the other way. It'll add up to maybe 0.2% to overall growth.
So it'd be
So we're talking about, when I say growth, I mean APR rate. This, the current APR rate that we're forecasting for the long term is a smidge under 0.4%. So we might get to 0.5%. But then migration is probably a bigger swing factor.
Okay.
Councilor Rosenthal, I think a way to think about this is the compounding interest kind of way to think about it, that a small change over a 20-year time horizon can be pretty significant. So as it propagates through the 20-year time horizon, yes, a small change can be meaningful, but they're all within the bounds of possibilities right now, given what we're seeing.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say it's small because historically we've seen growth average almost 2%. And in the last decade, since the Great Recession, it's trimmed to about 1%, and now we're talking something even half, again, as small as that 1%.
Okay. Okay.
So it's why it's considered, it's a sea change, and a 10th% probably not that much compared to the memory of people who've lived here a long time, how we've grown, that's why, so.
Councilor Nolan?
One quick question. Looks to me like your range is about 40, your high range is about 40% higher than your low range. That seems a pretty big
40%
range.
higher.
Easy to hit
It's-
within, and has significant implications. That difference has significant implications on our urban planning, although this is the 7 counties, right?
Yes. This is
But
the 7
if-
counties.
If it applies equally to our MSD, that's a big gap in
I think you're
land
speaking
use
to the
planning.
uncertainty of the long-term forecasting, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the cone does widen over time because part of that compounding that Josh mentioned, it compounds through every factor, births, deaths, and the economy, of course, there's quite a bit of. The
This, now
high
that
and
I
low
look
is
at it,
constructed.
this is a 30-year forecast
Yeah,
to
I think.
to
I
55,
can't-
so
as it
if you
goes
look
out to
at
20.
45, it's narrower.
Yes.
And that's the 20 years that we have to pay
Yeah,
attention
we'll
to.
look at the 20-year, but some of our planning projects actually go out a little further, so I let the model runs.
Thanks.
Councilor Nolan, let me see if this helps too. I wouldn't say that each of those factors are equally likely. In other words, so while the error bands are that big, the weighted average of the error bands is much smaller.
Right,
So-
because there are recessions during that time.
Right,
that
there's
affect-
things that bounce around in between, but yeah, overall, it's not as if the possible outcomes are distributed evenly across that huge range that you're describing.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm using a saw and not a hammer.
In other charts, I've attempted to make this more three-dimensional, and if you can imagine each slice as a bell chart, so around the dark baseline, the probability, the cumulative probability is much higher. So when you go to make a UGB decision, you're also gonna make a forecast acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement, you will pick, let's just call it, as our attorney calls it, you need to pick a point in the range. And historically, my recommendation as a professional economist is to pick the baseline. But you are, of course, free as a political body to pick anything in above, below, or anywhere in the universe. But you'd have to justify it obviously through legislature or whoever sues
right.
Metro.
In the interest of time, let's, I know you've got more after us too, so let's move on to the employment real fast. And Dennis, if you can, just.
Yeah, I'll be
kinda-
faster. There's a lot of details in employment, but I'm just gonna highlight a few high-level things and things that I think this council, through stakeholder engagements and others, have talked about. Employment slide, next one, please. So Josh mentioned that there's a really integral tightness between the demographic forecast, the population forecast, and employment. And this labor force this employment population ratio kind of shows you historically that kind of tightness. You notice that it's around 0.5. And it bounces up and down over time because of business cycles. And we know we've had them, and we're not, it's not like we don't expect them in the future. As I mentioned, it's a trend forecast. But the forecast for employment relative to that population forecast I just described at a baseline level, I don't include the highs and lows in this because then it would we're talking about multiple factors here to talk about. It's still conditioned around that 0.5 range. And that's really the point of this, is to show that it's hard to say that. I know that there are some pundits who say, well, we want to grow our region economically. But you have to consider labor force. And if you believe the population forecast and the labor force supply that comes from it, you can't grow much faster or slower out of that unless you either crater your economy or create some sort of economic dislocation or inflation that's just uncontrolled. That's not particularly realistic. I don't know if I've convinced you. We can talk about this because I think this could be a topic of contention going forward. Next slide, please. And here's the range forecast. It's just essentially, I forecast the sectors that make up, the different industries that make up the fabric of the economy of this region, and add them together, and you get a baseline forecast, and perturbing the inputs into that forecast, you get a similar high-low, much like I did in the demographic forecast. Next slide, please.
Time out. Mr. Chair, do you differentiate in employment among the sectors?
Yeah,
Do you
that's the next
differentiate?
slide.
Oh, okay.
Next
great.
slide.
Thanks.
So I guess right on a question.
Okay.
So that's it's that forecaster in me guessing right. So here we have a chart that shows the major employment sectors. There's actually more detail than this in the economic model, but I've just kind of rolled it up for ease of showing in a chart. But these are major specific sectors that are part of our region, and it goes from manufacturing all the way down through government. They're sorted by what's called the NAICS code. So I'm just going to highlight that the light blue bar is the current employment numbers from federal statistics, and the blue bar represents the extrapolation of that industry growth through 2044. You see manufacturing, as I said, and then in the middle, lower down, you see some of the service sectors. And the sectors that are growing fastest tend to be some of our larger industries. So we have construction growing fairly smartly going forward, retail trade, the service sectors, and of course, education and healthcare as another sector that's growing quickly. I want to highlight manufacturing because there's been a lot of talk about that. So our next slide, please, breaks out that bar and shows you some of the historical trend. To the left of that vertical line is the historical data for the region, the MSA, which is the darker line, and the US trend in the lighter kind of teal color. You see that why historically we've seen a downshift in national manufacturing, the outsourcing, the exporting of jobs in manufacturing to obviously lower cost countries where labor is cheaper and materials are perhaps more plentiful or easier to get to.
Yeah, a way to think about this chart a little bit is the light blue line is the nation, and it's been on a long secular decline in manufacturing, right? We've had policies that have made it more attractive for people to move manufacturing overseas, and they've done so, and lowered the costs for us for goods and all those things. The darker line is our region, and what you see there is coming out of basically the timber bust of the early 80s. And the reformation of Intel and all of the tech stuff out in Washington County, and all the way through until basically the tech bubble, all the investment that happened right around the turn of the century, and then we're back on a path that's more similar to the nation. And so it's more about us taking advantage of a growing industry when it was growing, and now that it's mature, us having a mature industry, than it is about manufacturing per se. It's about the specific types of manufacturing that we do and here and what the prospects are for that. And the prospects are basically that we will do better than the nation, but the nation probably won't do very well. And so we may not create thousands of jobs, we may keep thousands of jobs that the nation otherwise loses. So relatively we will look really good, but it's not a source of growth per se, like we would say something like education or healthcare or something like that.
Josh, are we doing a good job of accounting for automation and kind of we saw that over the last couple of years with robotics and things like that, especially in manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, we have a bit of an advantage there because we have the R&D here. So the research and development is a lot of intel's here. It's not the manufacturing per se. And so that's helpful, right? Because we're doing a lot of the applied sciences work here. For fabs and those kinds of things, we are seeing lower and lower numbers of workers as it becomes more and more optimal to mechanize. And that's going to happen over time. I don't think there's a way out of that. I think when we look at stuff like AI, there's a different discussion we had around professional business services and things like legal and accounting and things like that. But as far as traditional manufacturing goes, I think this is a pretty reasonable story.
Okay, thank you.
So I think this closes our presentation. So if there are specific questions about a particular sector or going back to the demographics, Josh will be here to answer more questions.
If there's any questions? Let's go with Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I'm curious, your take on the natural fall of the UGB share versus the 7-county area versus us tilting the scale and getting folks within the UGB.
I'm going to ask you to clarify what you're referring to, the natural fall of the UGB. Are we talking about a capture rate or are we talking about demographics? I'm sorry.
So anywhere we are on that line, do you think we stay on track with the same proportion of people within the UGB as outside the UGB? Or do you think we urbanize with the demographics of these folks? Are they raising their hand and saying, I'm young, I'm hip, I like an apartment? Or are these demographics, I would much rather live in Skamania, please keep me away from the city?
I didn't present anything on the trend in the capture rate, which it will be the next time I probably visit you.
Oh, okay, sorry, next
But
time's
I'm
fine.
happy to address that. Yeah, you're talking about a life cycle here of, we tend to fortunately bring in a lot of healthy migrants who work here and are young and smart, well-educated, and that helps our economy grow. And that growth, as they progress through life, generally means they come to our region footloose and probably single or fresh out of college or very young. And they haven't yet set roots. And oftentimes the story goes that they because of that, they tend to only have the wherewithal to, say, land and live in an apartment. And apartments are most plentiful in our core Portland area. And so they settle here, but then when they hit then the next stage of their life and they begin thinking about putting down roots, I think you've heard Josh and the state economist Mark McMullen call it root setting years. When they hit their root setting years, then and then they think about growing a family and so forth. That apartment they probably have outgrown because the majority of our apartments are one-bedroom apartments, and so that generally means they look for larger units, and larger units in this region have traditionally been the single-family unit of a house. And they begin starting to build a nest egg, buying a house, because wealth creation is something that many root-setting families want to make. And one of the best nest eggs, of course, is then owning your own home. And it's one of the few assets that appreciate, at least nominally, over time. Whereas everything else that you buy tends to depreciate. You go buy a car, the moment you drive off the lot, you just lost $10,000, right? We've heard that story. But historically, you buy a house and you really hope in many years, Great Recession type times discounted, your home goes up in price. We've seen during the pandemic, for example, the price of a home rise at a double-digit rate, 25%. And guess what? It's not coming down. If you go out and buy a house, it's 25, 30, 40% higher than it was pre-pandemic. And this year, I'm guessing that it's not gonna be double digit, but it's not gonna be below inflation. So it's probably in the 3.5%, 5% range if you're a first-time home buyer, if you're lucky, right? But, you know, high prices are not bad things if you own a home. It helps, as I said, your investment portfolio for retirement. So there's goods and bads from affordable or not affordable housing, right? So I'm not gonna, I haven't yet told my colleagues what the capture rate is, so I need to work with them on that. But yeah, that's gonna be part of the story as I come back to visit you again and tell you the next chapter.
Thank you.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Huang. I appreciate the presentation and the thoughtfulness that goes into it. It's always hard to predict the future, and we're usually wrong, but, you know, we try. And it's impossible, as I'm sure you know, it's impossible to predict spiky curves other than by using some generalized, you know, uniform sort of assumptions. And so, and I appreciate that. My specific question is, since we do know one potentially probable event that may happen, I'm assuming California has shown that an event such as a major earthquake would have no more than like a blip on the overall thing. It wouldn't affect the overall trend lines greatly. Is that a correct assumption? I mean, I don't think San Francisco, for example, or LA, they had some significant quakes, which we could have. It would disrupt things for a year or two, but then it would probably come back to normal?
Yeah, I have, Counselor, I haven't actually seen that kind of blip, if you will. The last earthquake I lived through was the 1989 San Francisco earthquake. And I remember it very well because it was during the World Series. And my favorite team was winning. But also my second favorite team was losing. And when I look at the migration, the historical record for the MSA in this region in 1980, I didn't really see a huge blip. I think the economy, affordable housing, and employment trends of that time well superseded an earthquake event of that magnitude. I would say that that was a pretty big earthquake.
Councilor, too, I think, you know, we tend to equate natural disasters as natural disasters, and they're all the same. But like, it would be very different. If we look at New Orleans and Katrina, that had lasting generational kinds of effects because you basically took swaths of the city and made them uninhabitable. It's a little bit different than an earthquake that has a one-time kind of thing and you can rebuild theoretically in the same place. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, I think Dennis's comments and your comments are right.
Yeah, I mean, one could predict some larger scale events that could have a long-term trend, but something that everybody predicts might happen is probably going to be, it'll jog things, but it'll probably come back pretty quickly.
An earthquake is a terrible thing to live through. But as Josh pointed out, other factors like how widespread, the persistency of the damage. San Francisco, California, building construction laws have anticipated and they built to make it more earthquake proof, and I think that helped a great deal. But like in this case of Katrina, which was so devastating for the New Orleans area, it forced a mass migration. You can look even further back and say that the Dust Bowl era was another mass migration of Americans because it had such lasting economic effects. Earthquake hit hard, but I think it was more centered.
Just a quick observation that while rare, we did have a period in many of our memories where housing prices did go down in real terms and people were underwater on their mortgage. So we shouldn't exclude that as a possibility.
Yeah, Councilor, as someone who bought a house in September of 2008, I'm keenly aware of that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm hoping that there's not a housing crisis of that nature. And hopefully, many of the policies that the federal government promulgated after that helped insulate us homeowners. At least that's the hope.
Did you have a follow-up, Counselor Nolan? Nope. Okay. Any questions? No? Okay. Oh.
Can I just wrap us up
course,
for
yeah.
a minute? Thank you, counselors. So as we started out by reminding you all that this is one piece of our puzzle, we appreciate you walking through this because it's gonna be a lot easier, I think, for us all when the urban growth report is brought to you in the summer. You'll understand how all of these pieces come together and show what we're looking at. And so the next time, so this is also, it is hard because we have never had a forecast that is like this before. And so be thinking about how that, we do have a range and there is growth and we should be really happy that we are growing. Not all places around the country will be growing. But it isn't as strong of a forecast as we've had in the past. And so I think just recognizing that and thinking about how we work with that information. It doesn't change the fact that we have a housing affordability crisis in our region. It doesn't change the fact that we want to support a really strong economy in our region. And so be thinking about, this is just one piece of all of the work that we do as Metro, but it's a critical part of our urban growth report. So I just wanted to be sure to say that and also to thank these guys for the work. And we'll have a lot more, next time we'll be talking more about capacity and the housing needs analysis with you all.
Thank you all for the great work.
And I'm gonna stay here because I'm not done.
All right, well, next on the agenda, we'll be looking at the 2040 Planning and Development Grants Administrative Rules Updates. In May of 2023, Metro launched its most recent iteration of the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program. Since January of last year, staff engaged local governments, community partners, technical consultants, and other stakeholders involved with past 2040 grants to assess how a program is working and identify potential changes to better serve program users. In October, staff proposed refinements to the program to reflect the feedback received, to streamline the process and to reconnect to the fundamental purpose of the grants, and also to consider ways to streamline the process to be more efficient and user-friendly. Amendments to the rules that govern 2040 grants are approved by Metro's Chief Operating Officer in consultation with Metro Council. Joining us today are Malou Wilkinson again, Aaron Key, Urban Policy and Development Manager, and Sarah Breckstone, the 2040 Grants Manager. Nice to see you all.
All right, well, now, different topic. Again, I'm Malou Wilkinson, she, her pronouns, and I just wanted to be clear, you all just got an attachment that we referred to in your materials, but it wasn't included in your packet. So that's what you just received. And I want to start out by just giving you all a quick reminder of why we're here today. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we are really excited to be getting the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program going again. You all just recently approved the first round of Cycle 11 grants in January. Just a reminder, in Cycle 11, there were 17 grant finalists from 10 different jurisdictions around Metro, and that council endorsed last October that it was around $4 million total. And Sarah and Aaron will be back in early March for the other half of those grants. So we're really thrilled to be getting that out. As we've been getting the grant program going again, we've been looking at how to best refine the program to be able to best serve the needs of our partners. And so that's what we're here today to talk about. Last year, staff did a survey and had a lot of conversations with our partners, grantees, and other stakeholders around the region to really understand what might make this program better. And we developed some concepts for ways to improve the program, and we brought those ideas to you all last October to talk about them, where you gave us some direction to move forward. So our refinements are really focused on improving responsiveness to our local government partners. This program was put in place for them. Effectiveness in producing outcomes that align with Metro values and goals, and focusing on flexibility and efficiency in operations and administration. So if we can go to the next slide. We've been working to implement those refinements, and we're really looking at doing it in two different ways. Mostly through amendments to the administrative rules, which the Chief Operating Officer can approve with council consultation, and our conversation with you is part of Marisa's consultation with you all. We've identified also two changes which will require a change to one section of the Metro Code. And so with your support, we would bring that code amendment back to you in a formal council meeting. So we're looking to hear from you on both of those elements today. I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and then Erin and Sarah will walk through our proposed refinements.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I will set a little bit of context. The 2040 planning grants are focused on removing barriers to growth. It's all about bringing to life the vision in our 2040 plan. It's focused on making areas ready to come into the growth boundary with concept planning and then comprehensive planning that moves them into development readiness. And it's also focused on areas inside the growth boundary that support compact urban development and the creation of communities, and particularly in our town and regional centers and along corridors. It's evolved over time to focus even more on economic growth and wealth creation and promoting equitable communities. And I think you'll see how the changes today kind of help and continue to promote those changes. The grants are meant to support planning that's all about our 2040 growth concept. Next slide. And to focus to, again, these changes today we're going to talk about, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah in a minute, and she's going to talk about how these aim to expand growth opportunities for nonprofits who are building community, to tribes and unincorporated urban neighborhoods that are interested in becoming part of the urbanized areas of the city, of our region. We're going to make the grants easier to apply for and make the opportunities to apply for them more frequent. And we're going to support our grantees so that more of them can use this program, even if they're small cities that have small staffs. So I will turn it over to Sarah Breakstone, who is our program manager, to talk more specifically about these three areas.
Thanks. Next slide, please. Good afternoon, counselors. Under the theme of expanding opportunities, we are proposing a few changes. The first of which is to allow some of the CET dollars to be allocated to the Community Placemaking Grant Program so that that program can better meet its demand for some of those smaller community-focused projects. We're proposing some updates to the administrative rules to allow federally recognized tribes to apply for and receive grants directly. That's something that our code and our rules are currently sort of silent on. So this would allow tribes to be treated the same way that cities and counties are treated in our program. And we're also making some changes so that unincorporated community groups could apply for and receive grants directly if they are interested in exploring incorporation and or annexation. So this would create a clearer path for work similar to what was done in Oak Lodge a number of years ago. I'll also point out that these changes are the ones that are triggering the need for an amendment to the Metro Code. The code right now has some somewhat specific language about who can receive grants. And so we'll need to make amendments there so that the code and the rules are consistent and complement each other. So that's where that's stemming from. Next slide. There you go. I think so. Yeah, that's right. Proposing some changes to make the program more accessible and easier to use both for our applicants and for staff and our screening committee. One of the bigger changes we're recommending is moving towards rolling cycles. So basically, applicants could apply at any time, and we would establish a schedule for quarterly review of applications and awards. We are also proposing to simplify the grant categories, and along with that, develop some clear and focused criteria that are used consistently across our application materials and our evaluation materials that are used by staff and by our screening committee. Next slide. And we also want to provide more support, or the appropriate level of support, to our local partners so that they are able to manage these projects in a timely manner and have successful outcomes. So with that, we're proposing to allow up to 20% of grant dollars to be used to pay for local government staff time spent managing these projects. We are also proposing to allow CET funds to pay for Metro staff time spent doing direct project support to the individual projects throughout their lifetime. And with that, we will be setting ourselves up to collect better information about how much staff time does it take to adequately and appropriately support these grant projects. And once we've gathered some good data on that, then we can better assess and evaluate whether or not additional changes might be warranted. Next slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Malou to talk about where we're going next.
All right. So with that, we really wanted to keep this short, knowing that it's been a long council meeting for some of you. So these program refinements are all they're all things that we talked to you about in October. We've been working with our COO to think about the best ways to implement these refinements. With your support, we would continue to work with her to implement the administrative rule changes. We'd then return to we'd return to council with the Metro Code amendments as well. That would go through the code, a couple of council meetings to adopt them in an ordinance. And after that, we'd be able to kick off the first rolling grant cycle, which would, I think, be really exciting for our local government partners, because the ideas for grants don't always fit, and the timing for grants don't always fit well with an annual cycle. So we would be, we'd be really excited to be able to kick that off. And I also just wanted to remind you all that we are restarting this program from really a pause during COVID with a whole new team. And we really want to be working with you all and working with Marisa, working with Catherine to make sure that this program is the most effective program it can be. And so we really do need some time to evaluate what's working well and what needs to be changed. So we don't think that these refinements would be the last refinements that we would bring to you all, but we think that it's a really good start and it's reflective of what we've been hearing from our local partners. So we'd love to hear your thoughts, and we're looking for kind of a thumbs up on working with Marisa to implement the administrative rules and coming back to you with code changes.
Great. Comments, questions? Councilor Lewis.
I'm going to start with an enthusiastic all thumbs up. Thank you for this hard work. I know that you've been with us twice before and you've heard various opinions, and I think you've paved a path forward that does meet our local government needs while also maintaining our vision of how to most effectively use these dollars. I'm particularly excited about your continued emphasis on making sure that we are doing the work of taking care of our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions. I think 20% is extremely fair, and at the point at which you have more data, we can reevaluate that later, but let's start there. I think that's really good, and I look forward to seeing what it actually takes to help our local jurisdictions, because I know it's oftentimes a menu of staff that get to go to these meetings and get to contribute to these projects. Extremely supportive of tribes applying directly. Obviously, I've been a huge advocate for continued eligibility for unincorporated urban areas who often are neglected by counties when it comes to true urban issues. So thank you. And then finally, I'm super excited for the potential around the community placemaking grants. My only question there is when is the amount of funds available going to be known for each cycle, and will that match up with the rest of our budget? Like, what is the annual cycle for CET? When do we take it off the top, or do we do it at the end in terms of the allocation for community placemaking?
Our proposal for community placemaking is what we talked to you all about last October, which was $250,000 in additional funds to add to the current amount for community placemaking. That is not a large amount in the context of the overall 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program, but it would, as you know, as having served on that committee, it would be a big difference in the community placemaking grant world. Those are small grants. We, I think, would want to, it's also, we don't have additional staff to manage the community placemaking grant program, and so we want, but we would be doubling the amount of grant that would be going out. And so we need to test out as well, if that makes sense. We want to continue to be sure that that money is being well spent, that we as Metro can get it out the door to those grantees. Really require a lot of time and attention. And it's part of what we're so thrilled to be able to do in that grant program. So we feel like that is both a manageable amount. It doesn't really change what's available to our local partners in the planning side. And we think we can do it right now without asking you for something else.
Fantastic. And I think that's a great amount of funds to start with. And honestly, I think the number of grants will probably go up, but first I would suspect the average grant award will shoot up because we've been giving haircuts for the last few years, so thank you.
And just to follow up on that, does that change the selection process? You know, it's a great joy for Councilor Lewis and I to serve on that selection panel with some great creatives and artists across the region. So is that substantially going to be similar, or is 2040 going to have more of an input onto the artist selection? Okay.
So it's critical to the community placemaking grant program that it not change the process and the criteria and the way that it's been working really well, as I think you all know, not just Councilors Wong and Lewis who are on the committee. It's been a really great way for us to get our money to some groups that just have no other way to do the work that they're doing. And so we're not proposing any changes to that, but that is one of the reasons for that code change that Sarah referred to, so that the money could go to those specific grantees, along with tribes, along with unincorporated urban areas that need to potentially become an urban area.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez, then Rosenthal.
Thanks, Deputy President Wong. Yeah, I think some general thoughts. Really happy about the grantee staff time allocation and the responsiveness that I'm hearing, especially from the cities in my district, in terms of just planning capacity is a constant issue, and wanting to have everything we need in place to prepare our infrastructure, housing supply, all that for the future. Similarly, really excited about establishing a path for tribes, so that's in line with the work that we've been doing at Metro. I'm curious for unincorporated areas, which my district has some pretty major, large urban unincorporated areas that are quite dense. I'm curious how that would work, you know, for a planning project and, you know, you could have a plan, but then how is that gonna be implemented without, I guess, the ownership of the county or some kind of public entity to really drive that? So I'm curious to hear some conversation around that, and I mean, especially Aloha comes to mind, and a community that has experienced decades of disinvestment. There's been good planning, I think, throughout different iterations, but it continues to just kind of be left behind. And then lastly, you know, on the community placemaking grants, I'll be honest, I kind of have a tension on that. On one hand, you know, our mission, make a great place. That means making the great place now and accentuating the diversity and celebrations and creating festive moments throughout our neighborhoods and our communities. At the same time, I feel like our region, again, has such important planning needs for jobs and housing that although it's a great grant program and we fund great grants through that program, I think taking money from planning for housing and jobs, which we need desperately right now, just feels like a tension that I want to call out. So I feel like as this kind of moves forward, I need a little bit more convincing, just personally, for that to understand some of the trade-offs there. But I would love to hear your thoughts on unincorporated, and how we think that could work. That's exciting.
Thank you, Counselor. Why don't we talk about one and then the next? So for the unincorporated areas, I'm gonna ask Erin to start with that.
Yeah, I think what we're doing here is providing the flexibility for those areas to figure out what works for them, and each one is going to be a little bit different. So Sarah referred to Oak Lodge as a place where they've already did a project, applied for grants. We found a workaround because we couldn't provide the grant directly to a group of neighbors. To begin the work of looking, essentially the work they did was to look at the options available to them of what it would mean to incorporate, what it would mean to become one of their neighboring cities, and they just needed help from a consultant to kind of look at what the possibilities were. I think a situation in Aloha could be different, and the intent is to provide those, if for any community that wants to figure this out, to have the opportunity to work with a city to figure it out together, to have the opportunity to work with their county together to figure it out, an opportunity to work on their own to figure it out and determine who, if anybody, they want to partner with going forward. And this just provides more flexibility. So it was always kind of a possibility without these changes. These changes will just make it easier for community that wants to work on making a change to have different options to do that.
Oh, that's actually a great example. Thank you.
And for the community placemaking grants, we are one of the goals is to get money to groups that are supporting equity goals as well. And so remember, those are very small grants. They've been really successful at achieving our goals, and the amount of money that we're talking about here is not really I wouldn't think of it as taking money away from the planning work that we are really wanting to support with our local partners. I would think of it as actually supporting that other planning work by bringing in community-based organizations and community groups into that process, because there are a lot of connections that get made through those placemaking grants that aren't made otherwise. And there are also ways to align and leverage the different programs in areas where there is a 2040 planning grant. We could potentially, there's an awareness and education building that happens that can get at bringing in people from a placemaking side as well. So I think that it's a small amount that is really complementary to the planning work that we are funding. That's the main focus. And the majority of what we're looking at doing here is actually focused on making it easier for the planning, we're in simplifying the categories so that the planning work that we want to fund is easier for our local partners to do.
Yeah. Do you have a number in mind for how much you plan to shift from CET?
$250,000
Okay.
is what we talked about in October, which doubles the placemaking grant program. But and this is a thing that this has to be on our list of what we continue to evaluate over time, because right now we have a backlog, we have a built-up amount of money that we were able to fund all 17 grant applications through the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program, because there's plenty of money there right now. We might not always be in that situation, and that's why this program is something that we're going to need to continually refine over time. One of the changes that you all made in 2020 to the code was focused on community stabilization. And that is one of the things that community placemaking does, is to help with that community stabilization component that you as a council identified as an outcome that we should have for the 2040 Planning and Development Grant Program.
Thanks,
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair Huang. First of all, I want to second what Councilor Lewis said. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think these are some positive changes. And then I want to comment a little bit and ask one question regarding the unincorporated areas, as you know. I mean, for example, I think writing the rules on that so they have to go through hoops, but not too many hoops. It's going to be tricky, as you know. I mean, Clackamas County has hamlets, which are already a defined thing. I can think of a hamlet right near me that might apply for a grant immediately to do something. And then Washington County has CPOs, which could perhaps constitute a local community that might apply for a grant. And then there's other just neighborhoods. So I think writing that so it includes all of those. So maybe you may have a comment on whether CPOs could qualify. That's one question. The other question, more specifically, at one point we floated the idea of limiting the staff support to cities of a certain size. Have we abandoned that idea and just eliminated to a 20% overall? I mean, because there was some concern that cities like Portland or Gresham or Beaverton or Hillsborough probably have sufficient staff to do what they need to do. Is that still on the table, or is that not being considered?
Councilor Rosenthal, really good questions. I'll take your latter question and then turn it to Aaron to answer the first one. The 20% felt, rather than come up with some formula of cities of a certain size and presume that we understand all of the budget issues of our local partners, we felt like, let's start with a 20% amount of the grant. They can choose to spend it on staff time, or they could choose to spend it on hiring a consultant. It's up to the local jurisdiction. It's something we really think that we should be evaluating over the next couple of years and see if it makes sense.
Okay.
And it might be that there should be a formula based on size, but that felt really challenging to implement.
Okay.
From the outset. Would you like to talk about the other one?
Yeah, I'll talk about the other one. The purpose so we did talk about placemaking, which is an opportunity for more nonprofits to participate in these grants, and that's why we would provide those monies to placemaking. But for the planning grants, our intent is to keep those primarily with jurisdictions, cities, counties. We're adding tribes, and we're adding community groups that are working towards incorporation or becoming urban areas. So whether that's incorporation or annexation into a neighboring city, we're making a special carve out, a special qualification for groups that are working to become urban areas. So we're not necessarily suggesting that all neighborhood groups could apply for planning grants, because the truth is that's hard for most community groups to be in a place to be doing planning grants, and they will be most successful in implementation when they're coordinating with local cities and with counties to do that work. So this is special to groups that are working to incorporate or annex and
come out of being county urbanized areas.
I think I understand that. I guess my comment would be that there are areas that need planning, don't have the resources, potentially could become they could become communities, regional centers or something like that, not exactly urban areas, but something less than urban areas. And it would seem that they might need help in the long run. In other words, not all these areas, I mean, we have different classifications, urban areas, community centers, regional centers. So I think we need to consider the 2040 and the kinds of concepts that we included in there and help people achieve what the regional status is that they achieve. And it might not be a full urbanization. It may not be appropriate. So my view would be that we should be a little bit more expansive in that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think you'll find that the program allows that currently. Counties can apply for planning grants for visioning of centers or particular neighborhoods. That kind of work is allowed within the grant program currently.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking of, there's some couple hamlets up in the Sandy River corridor. They might want to develop more of a planning perspective, but they're never going to become an urban area in a true urban sense. I don't know what their goals are, but these sort of areas exist.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Councilor Rose, do you have a follow-up?
In the interest of time.
Okay. I do have one, hopefully, quick question on the direct support for Metro staff to support, project development and implementation. Does that impact our admin rate on CET, like funds? Just wondering, because, we have an admin cap on our suburban housing measure and, other kind of taxes that we collect. And I'm all for having the correct amount of admin, but I'm just wondering if this bumps up our admin, like, do you anticipate a large jump in that or not?
We do not, so that's a good question. There is an administrative cap for CET, I think, is it 5%? 5%. 5%.
5%?
And that covers something, that covers the administration of the program. What it does not cover is the technical support that our local partners need to implement the grants. And so what we are proposing is we do not anticipate a large impact to the CET funds going out the door. We anticipate it being actually quite small, but we need to be able to be supporting those grantees, and that's not something that we are currently capturing very effectively. And that's what we want to be able to track over a 2-year time frame, and then come back and see if it is working, check with our partners, check with you, see if it's working, and if it's not, then we need to make some adjustments.
Great, thank you. Okay, seeing other questions or comments, thank you for your time. I think we have general
So we're looking to be
support.
sure that you're good. All right.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so
Thumbs
much
up
for
from
your
all.
time. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a vote, not vote.
Yeah.
Not vote.
We'll be back for a real vote.
Okay, our final item is looking at an update on the natural areas work plan to fund real property purchases by a public partner through the bond acquisition program of the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond Measure. The Metro Council and voters in the region strongly supported the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond Measure, which created the opportunity for Metro to contribute bond dollars to public partners to acquire property to protect fish and wildlife habitat and connect people to nature. Prior to the passage of the 2019 Parks Bond, Metro's natural area work plan was updated in 2014 to provide council the opportunity to delegate to the Metro Chief Operating Office the authority to purchase properties under Metro ownership. Staff are here today to discuss changes to the natural areas work plan that would provide council the opportunity to delegate to the Chief Operating Officer the authority to also contribute bond funds to properties purchased by public partners. So here today are John Blasher, Parks and Nature Director, as well as Shannon Leary, Real Estate Manager. Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Wong and councilors. John Blasher, Parks and Nature Director, he, him, his pronouns, here with Shannon Leary, our Real Estate Manager. Seeing as that we're the last presentation, we have about 80 slides and it'll take a few hours and some complex quadratic equations. No, hopefully this is pretty short and sweet. We're excited to be here today to talk about some of our efforts to protect special places across the region through land acquisition funded by the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond, which is that promise made to voters that builds upon decades of parks and nature work. Next slide, please. So this program last came to you in April of 2022, where you affirmed the Protect and Restore Land and Create Trails for Walking and Biking Target Area Refinement Plan. You also gave staff direction to proceed with acquiring land through easements to meet the goals of these programs. Since then, the team's been very busy, talking with hundreds of landowners and to date purchasing 21 properties for $11 million. Today, we want to recap the process by which you've directed staff to implement these plans. We want to highlight some challenges and opportunities we've identified with the current process and also share a proposed solution for your feedback. Next slide. So making a great place to live is a big part of what Metro does. Some of that means finding that harmony between nature and humans. There's multiple ways to achieve that in land protection through acquisition is a big part of Metro's Parks and Nature program to protect water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, and create opportunities to enjoy nature close to home through a connected system of parks, trails, and natural areas. The program has been very successful over 25 years, acquiring over 500 individual properties. This is due in no small part to Council's direction to staff through adoption of the refinement plans, which really directs the what and why staff should focus on acquiring, and the adoption of a work plan, which guides the how the work is done. In all three bond measures, Metro Council adopted resolutions directing staff to acquire properties that meet certain goals and objectives in each target area, which we call the Target Area Refinement Plan. And you also set up the process through which council delegates authority to the chief operating officer to acquire those properties, which we call the Natural Areas Work Plan. So this slide before you just shows a little bit of the changes over time of the refinement plans, which is the what and why, and the work plans, which is the how, and some of the updates of and adoptions that council has taken over the years. You can see the work plan in 2006 was substantially the same as the work plan in 95, but we did some updates based on lessons learned. And then in 2010 and 14, council made some additional updates to the work plan, which created some more efficiencies in response to additional lessons learned. Specifically in 2010, council adopted trail easement acquisition guidelines and due diligence parameters to allow staff to more efficiently acquire easements and assign them to local partners who will ultimately own and operate those trails. In 2014, the council adopted an amended work plan that incorporates many small updates to facilitate transactions, including the ability to enter into agricultural leases for up to 10 years, whereas it was previously 1, and settle small encroachment issues through easements. Both of those scenarios would have required previously coming to council for the discussion on each of those individual items. So as we're looking at implementing the 2019 bond, we've identified an additional area for some clarification in the work plan, which we think can help to make a more efficient implementation of this bond measure and working through the refinement plan. With that, I'll pass it to Shannon. We can go to the next slide, please.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. As John said, my name is Shannon Leary, and I use she, her pronouns. So as established in the 2016 Parks and Nature System Plan, Metro's role in the region is big nature close to home. Metro does not typically manage small parcels within other park providing jurisdictions because local park providers are the experts on providing nature or outdoor experiences within their communities. Related, Metro's role in the regional trail system is to convene jurisdictions to plan, adopt a regional trail system plan every 5 years, provide funding and support for trail right-of-way acquisition. The local park provider's role is to hold the property interest, design, build, and manage these trails. The current work plan, as last adopted in 2014, contemplates Metro acquiring property by setting out the acquisition parameters under which the chief operating officer is authorized to negotiate and complete real property acquisitions without further council review and approval. The 2019 Parks and Nature bond measure directs use of bond funds to acquire property, but it does not expressly require that Metro own the property, nor does it prohibit Metro from contributing bond funds to public partners to acquire properties. However, since this particular work plan only contemplates Metro-led property acquisition, this prevents the COO from being able to contribute to acquisitions in scenarios where a property meets the target area refinement plan goals, but it would be more aligned with regional roles for our public partner to lead the negotiation or hold the property interest. In the current status quo, each of these individual scenarios would need to come before the council for discussion and consideration. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of examples we'd like to share in order to help ground this concept. This comes up most frequently in trail easement or property acquisition, as well as our urban target area, which contains the most of the land within the urban growth boundary, because we have the most overlap with public park providing jurisdictions and the most opportunity to leverage our capacity and our resources. So these two scenarios are both real scenarios we're talking about right now, but to respect the integrity of the negotiations in this public setting, I won't share specific details about the location or the partner. So on the west side, there's a property, it's approximately 2.5 acres. It's identified in our target area refinement plans as a tier 1 property for trails. Our partner jurisdiction is negotiating with the seller to purchase fee title to build a trail connection. Staff does not recommend Metro own fee title of a future trail corridor within the city because it's not aligned with Metro's role, but we would like to be able to contribute bond funds to securing this trail right-of-way through the Create Trails for Walking and Biking program. Within the current work plan, currently the COO is not able to contribute because it's not a Metro-led negotiation, even though it's one of our priority properties and helps achieve the overall bond goals. And in this case, Metro leading the negotiation is not recommended because the city already has an established relationship with the seller, and the city has capacity and interest in continuing to lead the negotiation and close the deal. On the east side, we have another scenario. This is less than 1 acre of tier 1 urban target area wetland within a city on the east side of the region. The transaction structure requires a land use action, a property line adjustment, to acquire a portion of this property and property line adjust it into property the city partner already owns. Staff does not recommend Metro own a portion of this fee title, not only because it's not aligned with Metro's role in the region to own small parcels within other park providing jurisdictions, but also because of the complexity of the property line adjustment into existing property another public partner already owns. Staff recommend contributing funds toward protection of this wetland and stream corridor, but through the current work plan are limited because it's not a Metro-led negotiation. Metro leading the negotiation in this scenario is not feasible. It's not recommended, but also not feasible because of the land use work required. The city is best situated to complete land use work that relates to property they already own. So those are just two examples. Generally, our staff capacity, the majority of the protect and restore land and create trails for walking and biking acquisition funding continues to go towards Metro-led transactions, resulting in Metro-owned and managed properties. But as we all know, partnerships are essential to advancing our desired regional outcomes. And these are examples of scenarios where we have a ready and willing partner, but are limited in what we can do because of the technical language of the work plan. So today we would like to share a proposed solution to this technical barrier, some trade-offs, and then seek your feedback. Next slide, please. So the goal of this proposed work plan amendment or update is to clarify that the council does support Metro contributing these funds to these types of property purchases led by public partners that meet our shared goals, but that may not result in Metro owning the property or an interest in the property, are transactions that may not be led, the negotiation may not be led by Metro, and to outline the general terms for these types of contributions. If the council adopts this natural areas work plan update, Metro will be able to leverage our financial and staff capacity resources more effectively alongside partners in the region who have shared priorities. The work plan will clearly state council support for the bond acquisition programs to contribute to property purchases that meet the 2019 Parks and Nature bond measure intent and criteria, as well as the target area refinement plans, the goals and objectives for both the protect and restore land and the create trails for walking and biking program areas, regardless of whether Metro is leading the real estate negotiation or results in an ownership interest. Alternatively, if the council does not adopt the natural areas work plan update, the COO will not be authorized to contribute funds to partner-led transactions that meet these shared goals. Instead, opportunities to contribute funds to partner-led transactions will come to council individually for approval and discussion and possible approval. This option will provide the most control and risk mitigation to Metro, but will not allow us to leverage our resources effectively or recognize the expertise of our public partners. It could also result in Metro owning partial interest in properties or easements across the region, which is inconsistent in the urban area of the region, which is inconsistent with our role as established in the system plan, or our role in planning and supporting development of the regional trail network. Next slide, please. I think this is where we go to questions and discussion.
Thanks, Shannon. So that's what we have for you today. Interested in hearing any questions you have or discussion about this opportunity to delegate authority to the COO to allow staff to enter into some of these partnerships with local providers on land acquisition. Thanks.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Let's go with Councilor Nolan, then Gonzalez.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have two connected questions, if I might. I'm a little confused about the two examples that you provided. You've expressed that both of those examples are Tier 1 properties, and yet you say Metro doesn't recommend that Metro invest in them. So how do they get to be Tier 1 if they're not on our plan as priorities for Metro to invest in?
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. To clarify, it's more, we don't recommend that we lead the transaction deal, that we let the local provider take the lead in the transaction, because some of the target areas fall within, right, it's overlapping, so it falls within local jurisdictions. And often it's those local park providers or local jurisdictions that have the strongest relationships and will ultimately end up being the ones to manage and operate. So it's sort of that trade-off opportunity. So it's Tier 1, we recommend, it's more of the process for who is doing the negotiations in the deal. And that's where we recommend that the local providers continue those conversations on those specifics.
So that does lead to my second question, which is, could both those projects and other projects you envision might be influenced or accommodated by the changes you're proposing be accomplished under the local share? Could a city use funds that come out of Metro's Parks and Nature Open Spaces Fund to purchase these on their own?
Yes, they could. That is a conversation that has come up with us many times in thinking about that. Some of the things that we're trying to balance is how much local share funds that each provider has and where they have some of their other priorities around some of their acquisitions or their capital development in their park system, and balancing that as a regional government, we're trying to provide both those resources as well. And what's our role? We get this, I think, in every bond. Why doesn't more of that regional bond funds for acquisition go towards more localized projects and acquisitions within the urban growth boundary rather than outside the urban growth boundary? And so these are some of the trade-offs that we go through and ask those partners, where do you have those funds yourself, and where, but for Metro, could we do that? Also, we've had challenges in getting the bond all up and running between pandemic and different staffing things, and so we're also looking at opportunities to be expeditious in being able to put funds towards good properties, good projects in ways that are efficient.
If I could add to that. The Protect and Restore Land Program and the Create Trails for Walking and Biking Program, those acquisition programs collectively, we went through a robust refinement process with you all to establish priorities. These are some properties that came out as priorities for Metro, and where we have a partner that shares our goals and is willing to take on some of the legwork for us in terms of leading the negotiation, contributing some funds, whether they're local share or not. That to me is really exciting because that frees up our staff to be able to work on additional projects. We're able to contribute potentially, if you support this, funds to achieve multiple goals, while our staff capacity is able to be expended in different ways to work on different projects.
And I'm, on first blush, leaning toward just increasing the funding for the local share. But maybe you can tell me if you're envisioning a budget amount for COO authorization to grant funds to a local jurisdiction outside of the local share, which is the way I understand your proposal.
I'm not quite sure I'm tracking your question. Maybe you're picking this up, but we're not seeking additional funding or authority. It's just the current COO authority to use protect and restore land funds for some of these.
So where would the funds come from?
From the bonds protect and restore land program, which has 155 million in it.
More specifically, what wouldn't get done?
Well, we would want to we would lead the negotiation. If this authorization is not granted, our staff would need to step in and lead the negotiation with the seller because this is a priority for the Protect and Restore Land program. There would be complexities because our city partner already has a relationship with the seller. In the other example, the property line adjustment would be complicated because we don't own the adjacent property, the partner does. But these are priorities for these two programs. They're not solely city or partner priorities. They're top priorities for the Protect and Restore Land program. And we're seeking to leverage partner capacity in some ways to help get these things done. So I think that would be the difference. There's not another
churning,
project.
but thanks for the information.
Does that
Thanks for
mean
the
that
clarity.
future maintenance costs would be assumed by that jurisdiction?
Yes.
And not by Metro?
Yes.
Okay.
And liability should something come up on the property.
Great. Any more line of questioning on
No,
that?
thanks.
Okay.
It was helpful.
Let's move on to Councilor Gonzalez, then Lewis, then Rosenbaum.
Sweet, I'll try and be quick because I know we're short on time, but I think what's really helpful right now is that I can think of examples where this additional flexibility would be very helpful, especially in my district. So I'm supportive of the plan that you're proposing and understanding that. I also know that over the last few years, in the instances where Metro has acquired first, then we're in this kind of the second phase trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do the O&M for this site? And so I think often if we're able to kind of move that partnership upstream, will help alleviate some of the issues that we've seen. There's again other examples. So yeah, I think it's a smart change, and especially within the urban growth boundary where we do have those existing partnerships, I think there's some shovel-ready projects that would immediately benefit and accelerate our investment, which again I think it's smart for us to want to use as expedience as to reiterate a word you said. So just thumbs up. And I feel the feedback from small local governments in my district reflected in the recommendations you're making. So thanks.
Great.
Yep.
Councilor Lewis?
Sure, thank you so much, Deputy Council President. I guess when I think about the work that you want to do in partnership with our local jurisdictions, I want you to be nimble. I want you to be able to invest, particularly at the tier 1 level, in a greater purchase that local jurisdictions are in the lead on, particularly if they are jurisdictions that have your confidence in the negotiations, in addition to being a tier 1 or a prime target. My concern is I don't see the problem with having to get council approval. I don't think any of these real estate transactions are held up by our council calendar unless they're happening in August. So I don't quite understand why it would necessitate skipping something that's maybe in code for good reason. I'd be willing to have more time with Parks at these council meetings anytime. If it needs to be executive session, since it's contemplation of a real estate transaction, I think we can generally schedule those quickly. For the two that you're currently contemplating, like, let's do it next week. So I guess I just wanna like fully empower you to do the thing you wanna do, and I'm questioning why we need to empower the COO instead of just check the box with the council. I mean, if you've got two things on the burner, let's do them. And if we do get to the point where you're having trouble getting access to us in our time, that's when I want to deputize the COO with that authority. I don't know, I'm just being contrarian for a moment. But go ahead and do this. This is the right approach. Just we're not the problem. Like, lean into us. You need more time with us? Okay, we'll find you more time.
Council Rosenthal.
I'll pass.
Okay. I guess similar to the contrarian vein of questioning, I'm curious about how you might message this going forward and thinking through kind of unintended consequences. Like I don't, and I'm not saying they would, but potentially local jurisdictions might think that in addition to local share, there's another pathway to get their projects funded, and that, you know, us as counselors might be receiving a lot more phone calls or advocacy for specific projects in specific neighborhoods because they know Metro now might be a direct stakeholder in that. So I'm wondering if you're gonna, I guess, just think through really how to message it to the public and local jurisdictions that this is not like a backdoor to bond funds, knowing that, you know, local jurisdictions already have local share. So I do want to support that like sense of like nimbleness and adaptability. But I don't want that to become like another piggy bank, for lack of a better word, kind of going forward. So that's just kind of like what's rolling around my mind.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Wong. For that, yeah, we can definitely think through more of what that messaging can look like, and if there's any specific elements that if you all are in agreement with this approach that you'd like to see before we bring a resolution for you all to consider that looks to makes it very clear that this is not to be an additional or a supplement to local share, but this is trying to be in addition to as specific strategic opportunities. I don't think we have many of these that have come by over the years, so this is more of just some increased flexibility and nimbleness. But I don't know if we had any other things on messaging we had.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just emphasize that these opportunities would only arise where there is a specific, like a tier one top priority for Metro that's within a local park providing jurisdiction that has interest and capacity on working with us on the transaction. So I see these projects as more often than not driven by Metro in partnership in terms of planning the partnership. And then the ask here, the discussion here is then when it goes to implementation, can the partner be lead on implementation? Right now, as the work plan's crafted, our COO has to be lead on implementation.
Okay, well, that makes sense to me. I think just being really clear and articulate about that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, it's not intended to be a free-for-all. It's,
Okay.
yeah,
Great.
thoughtful and strategic.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you. I did occur a question that I wanted to ask. Since right now we can still participate and we have to do it through the council, how many of these have come up in the last few years? I mean, is this like a frequent occurrence or, I mean, you have two examples here, but.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we've had a couple of cases where it exceeded the COO's 10% authority and things like that, but how many of these, would this greatly streamline it, or is this just a sometimes occurrence?
That's a great question. These are two that are really ripe right now in terms of this partnership. I can share that we've done over, I think it's 510 transactions in the life of the bond. About 80 of those have had some form of partner financial contribution. Almost all of those, because of the way the work plan is drafted, Metro has led negotiation and partners have contributed funding. This would allow opportunity for partner to lead negotiation and Metro to contribute funding, if that was the right move for us. Just, this wouldn't necessarily happen every single time. I think it would be very situational. And so that's one piece, I guess, if that helps give context. It doesn't quite answer your question in terms of other projects that have come up. We also, this is the first bond measure where we've had an urban target area. We've worked in small portions of the urban area before, but this is the first bond measure where we've had an urban target area, and we have 13 priority zones within the urban growth boundary that overlap with local park providers, and we're gonna be, we're gonna need to partner with them, whether it's on the negotiation, whether it's on financial contribution, whether it's on management of the property, in order for that project to be successful in their local community. So we have priorities based on fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, connecting people to nature, and we're trying to find those areas where our priorities overlap with the local partners' priorities, and we're able to leverage our shared resources, whether it be financial, negotiation expertise, seller knowledge, to get these deals done in the most efficient way possible. And it's not gonna look the same in every transaction. But right now we are limited because right now Metro has to lead all the transactions unless we come back and talk about each individual one here.
I see Marisa has a hand up as well.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Wong. I just wanted to add a little bit of context to, why this conversation now. We have been working very closely with John and his real estate team to identify barriers to implementing our plan. And, because we've had successful bonds in the past, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been purchased. And so we are now in a mode where negotiations, maybe take longer. They're just, there aren't as many opportunities as there were when Metro first began doing this work. And so this subject where we hit a limitation when we were looking to, participate in a deal, kind of just illuminated like one type of deal that we don't have authority to do on my side of the house. Whether you decide to amend the work plan to give us that flexibility, overall, or whether you say, we like the flexibility, but we want you to come to us. Either way works for us, but we wanted to illuminate that there's this particular type of deal that lives in this overlap area that we would like to bring to you, and we would like to participate in, because it does have those other benefits of long-term savings if another jurisdiction is managing the property. We have over 18,000 acres and counting, and we don't have unlimited resources to maintain those properties. So there are a couple different benefits here, but just wanted to chime in with that. This is kind of coming to you in the greater context of our examination of how we make sure that we're accelerating and spending our bond funding well.
Great. Thank you. We look forward to further conversation, but for me personally, I would rather not have a executive session for a 1 acre purchase, and I think providing that flexibility does make a lot of sense. But I hear there's consternation amongst my colleagues to have further conversation.
I think you're also hearing, and maybe this is a test balloon, that while we consider this proposal to change practice, that if there are items now on your agenda that you need to bring before council, I support Councilor Lewis's suggestion, get them on the schedule. If that means having a separate meeting scheduled, let's do it. Let's don't hold you up on the ones that are hot right now.
Councilor Rosenthal?
I'd just make the comment that what I'm worried about is that council will lose some knowledge that we gain from hearing about some projects that we have with partnerships. And if it goes through a process that doesn't come to the council, we have less information to share or to understand what's going on in other people's districts. So I have some concerns about that, but I'm open to further discussion.
If I may, even on any of the transactions that you have through COO authority, we provide that memo and notice to you all in advance as part of the closing to keep you all looped in. So you have full transparency to some of the deals we have. I understand you're saying you'd be interested in seeing more of those earlier on in the process or throughout the process, or you're cognizant of concern that you might miss out on some of that. But I just want to remind you all that you have full transparency to how all of those dollars are spent on these acquisitions, whether that's something that comes directly to you all as council for a decision or goes through Maurice's delegated authority, the COO's delegated authority.
And I think in some cases too, it might make the most sense to come to council and talk about each individual transaction in an executive session where we're partnering. And in other cases, our staff might just lead the transaction, and that would be capacity that's not available to do other deals. So it would be it would end up being the same scenario that we have today, which is delegated authority to the chief operating officer to acquire property. We would just lead the transaction as the current work plan states.
Okay. And then just to summarize, because I'm a little fuzzy on if you want us to come back with the amendment or if you want us to stay the course and not request the amendment, or if you would like some more time to discuss either in briefing. So if there's a summary of what the decision is at this point, that would be great so we know whether to work on a resolution or not.
I think what I'm hearing is the council would probably appreciate some more time to think about it. And, maybe I think if you've had some draft language around what might be in the resolution, that we would all be able to review it and give feedback before you all coming back.
Sounds good. We can circulate that draft resolution language, set up some briefings, and then also take a look at these two deals that we mentioned. And if it feels like we need to bring those to you immediately, we'll get those on the calendar as soon as you allow us to join you if needed. Thank you.
We have a lot of time next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday?
No council agenda.
That's right.
Really? Wow. So much time, so much fun.
Thursday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, thank you
See
so
you in a
much.
week.
It was canceled.
No, that's Thursday.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you so
Really
much.
appreciate
Because
it.
Tuesday.
Tuesday was canceled too.
Tuesday was canceled too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, wrapping up our agenda, I know we're just a couple minutes over, but are there any chief operating officer communications?
Deputy Council President, just very quickly, I wanted to give an update on Expo Futures. The Historical Significance and Memorialization Committee, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Is continuing to refine the community engagement plan with our consultants. Community engagement is expected to occur from May to August, and Metro's Tribal Affairs Program is coordinating tribal engagement directly. A subcommittee of the Historical Significance and Memorialization Committee is planning a spring storytelling event designed to give community members and Metro leaders a common understanding of each of the three impacted communities' history with and relationship to the Expo site. We'll be returning to you with more information as we get closer to that date. The Sports and Facilities Committee is also working on finalizing a statement regarding community and public access to Expo Futures that will be used to inform future recommended uses. The committee will review and discuss part 2 of the sports feasibility study, which includes a market analysis, site constraints, and the results of stakeholder interviews later this month. In addition, our Deputy COO Andrew Scott launched the Expo Future Funding Task Force. Councilors and MERC commissioners will be asked to join after internal staff phases are complete, and external partners will be added after the sports feasibility study is complete. The task force goal is to identify funding strategies for your future consideration. Our team is working hard to keep you all looped into what's going on with the various strands of the project. We're planning to bring updates and key information to you in a few key ways, but we're always open to, requests and suggestions if this isn't working for you. So we'll be bringing you a one-year Expo Futures update at Council's March 12th work session. In May 2024, the team will review the findings with you from the sports feasibility study and affirmation of the sports pivot at a joint meeting with Merck. And then final recommendations for meaningful memorialization and the sports pivot will come to council in December of 2024 at a joint meeting with Merck. So just to give you a sense of kind of where we are now and where we're going to be going in the future, we are going to be circling around a recommendation at the end of the year. So it's pretty exciting. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, that's my update.
Any questions? No? Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Let's go with Councilor Communications. Colleagues? No?
I'll just.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Councilor Lewis had her up first.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just, the county opened a Safe Rest Village, 30 units in Aloha last Friday. That was a lot of people in attendance. It's up for operation now, and that's another step forward.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis?
Sure, thanks so much. I wanted to let folks know that yesterday, the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Body met like a work group, not a full quorum, but a meeting to work through some of the red line on the draft of their annual report. And I guess I just wanted to flag that Chair Harrington came with a number of questions. So I think there's a moment of trying to make sure that everybody's operating from the same numbers, and our report is able to meet the needs of all the counties in their various positions. And I think Chair Harrington wants to make sure that people are seeing what's happening in Washington County distinct from what's happening in Multnomah County, distinct from what's happening in Clackamas County. So it's a moment of needing to distinguish the three programs, but also our job is to come up with an annual report that reflects the whole region. Second, I want to thank Councilor Rosenthal, but the Glean event was amazing on Friday night, and I would encourage all of you to stop by Parallax Art on 14th near Flanders and check out 5 amazing artists from our region who found everything in their exhibit at the transfer station. Beautiful work. And also the notes from legislative session update this morning. Councilor Nolan, fill in what I leave off. But the important takeaways are, so far, every bill that Metro cares about is still alive. Yesterday was posting deadline, and then next Monday is the work session deadline. So in order for the bills we care about to stay alive by close of business next Monday, they will need to have gone through a work session. So that's actually taking action down at the legislature to vote them either to the floor or their next committee. And then also we're just supposed to keep our ears open and stay nimble as very rapid conversations happen on the governor's housing bill. Anything else? I think that's my takeaway from our update this morning.
You've covered it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the update. Okay, seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, February 22nd at 10:30 a.m., which will be held off-site at the Hidden Creek Community Center in Hillsborough. So we'll be off this Thursday and next
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
See y'all in District 4.
So it's Thursday, February 22nd.
Can I get there?